So cliche.
Yeah, sorry. So as always, thank you to our amazing sponsors, including BD Water, who have been a sponsor for the last few years. Thank you for jumping on board. And Rio Tinto, as always, for letting us use this venue. And the other amazing sponsors up here. I can't even remember what this is because Rob usually says that hopefully we don't have an incident. I'm pretty sure if the beep 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 sound, we go down the stairs and it's going to be garden area out in front. Just be accountable for everybody here and make sure we don't lose anybody. Fingers crossed. Would love to acknowledge the Wajak people who are the traditional custodians of the land that we are currently meeting on, and also the many traditional owners of the lands that we all work on. We'd like to pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and we really hope that we can work together with gratitude, respect and kindness and caring for this country and one another. No. Next event is supposed to be on the 28th of May, but we're going to look to bump that back a week because we have to bump this back a week with the Easter Anzac break. So hopefully we can bump that into early June, just pending confirmation with the name. But the talk will be modelling of the lower Burdekin Delta in Queensland. It's quite a big contentious area that's had a lot of work, so there's hopefully some new things in there for us all to learn. July, we currently don't have a speaker lined up, so if anybody's got anybody in mind or any topics that you would like to hear about, please let me know and we will do our best to find someone to present in that space. We have the Darcy lecture in September, which will be one of the two talks up there, hasn't been decided yet. And hopefully you're all lucky enough to go to Melbourne in September. I don't think I am, unfortunately. Hopefully everybody else gets the opportunity to present or join into the big discussions there for the International Congress. That's it for us. So I would like to welcome Barkley Day, who is an expert in water licensing and trading, which is a pretty topical subject these days when we're running out of water, especially in the Perth Basin. So I'm super keen to hear what Barkley has to say about his learnings and the requirements in that space. So please, Barkley, take it away.
I'm just pressing here, just move along.
Oh yeah, sorry, I can put that on. I don't know how to set up if you guys present it.
Cool. Hello everybody. My name is Barkley Day. I'm the General Manager of the BD Water Group, which is a group of companies in the commercial water space around Perth. Look, I'm not a hydro. We work a lot with hydros. We have a lot of hydros that are clients of ours and work with our business. But I'm personally not a mechanical engineer by trade, but I have a keen interest in water. BD Water actually largely founded the water trading, commercialisation of water trading in WA. It's a very new market, very much in its infancy, and still very much developing. And as you're going to see from this presentation, we're a little behind in some ways, particularly with regulation catching up and this overall process. We have a pretty complex water system in around Perth, which is mainly where we work, as a lot of you guys know. But water trading is imperative. It's going to become a real big thing, if not already. Just with so many of the resources around Perth being over allocated or fully allocated, trading is becoming one of the only options for getting a license issued for groundwater in Perth. Feel free to heckle and be involved. Ask questions as we go. I don't mind. This is meant to be a conversation. So by all means, butt in if there's something I don't understand. I'll explain a fair few different things around regulation that we've understood being in the private market. But by all means, make it a challenge. This is meant to be a conversation. The drive behind this and us speaking today is actually that we want to free up trading in WA. We're trying to make it easier for farmers. We're trying to make it easier for land developers and those private property owners to get access to groundwater licenses compliantly. So So this is a big thing. We want to start this conversation, and we need sort of help to push this through regulation, as well as backing from hydros as far as their involvement in what goes on here. So I'll quickly run you through a bit of an introduction to myself and the business that I helped build, just to give some background on what we're talking about here. And then I'll run you through the regulation component to do with trading at a high level, which I'm sure you guys know some of, but just from our experience. And then water licensing, and then how that works, groundwater licensing in Western Australia, and then trading, and then how that sort of comes together with a bit of a case study of one of the clients or projects that we've worked on or are still working on. Okay, I've loved water ever since I was a kid. A little too young. This is me at it looks like my 3rd birthday with 3 candles there. And this is me very excited with the sprinklers on the cake. So I've loved sprinklers ever since I was a child. I can't explain it, neither can anyone in my family. But I've been obsessed with sprinklers ever since I was that young. I never really grew out of that. I collect sprinklers. I sell thousands of them every year. But yeah, it's awesome. I've always loved sprinklers. One of my favorite memories as a kid is going to the rubbish tip with my granddad, and we found a bunch of old turf rotors. This is 25 years ago at the tip, so I decided they were all coming home with us, and this is one of them. My mum took a video the other day, so 25 years later, after they were dumped at the tip, we're still making use of those. That's pretty cool to see. There's quite a few of them at my mum's farm, or my parents' farm. So I started as a sprinkler lover. I did a bit of a traineeship thing at Water Talk, which is based out of Mewshay there, which is where my parents' farm is. Before getting into WA to do mechanical engineering. And while I was at uni, I started a small irrigation business just to get me going. We funded my beer money at uni and my degree, I suppose. I graduated and I started working at FMG. And I worked on, while I still had my little business, while I was at FMG, I was part of the projects team that delivered on the single largest dewatering program in the entire southern hemisphere at that time. At Cloudbreak, we pumped 4.5 times the weight of hypersaline water out of the ore body than we did in iron ore, and that equated between 180 and 200 megatons of water every year. And it's bigger and badder now. That was sort of 7,000 to 8,000 litres per second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is a pretty cool system when you see the scale of water being moved there. It's a re-injection system as well, so it goes straight back in and circulates through the Fortescue Marsh. It's really interesting. I was part of that team there. I went through Christmas Creek, Port Hedland, and then finished up at Solomon and the plants there. Whereas a fresh graduate, I asked for a 60k pay rise and they quickly said no. So I started 2 businesses and quit. This being one of them. One of them, Corey, didn't work out. It was in the property space, but the other one was BD Water, and that was sort of 7 years ago now, and we're flying along real strong. BD Water is an integrated commercial water services provider. We basically start a project fresh with the licensing side of it. We will strategize with you to figure out what the best groundwater licensing option is for you to make sure your property is going to be compliant, and that dictates a lot of what system is going to be built around that. We run a drilling business as well, and there's really no scale of water bore that we can't drill. That's sort of starting with real shallow superficial stuff, right up to the deepest of the deep, over 1 kilometre deep if we needed to with some of the rigs we run. So we're into drilling pretty heavily, mainly around Perth stuff though, so a lot of commercial work around Perth. And we'll build all the irrigation infrastructure as well. So we're at sort of the largest scale you'd be in Western Australian irrigation now. And we're talking sort of the Armidale line under MetroNet with the Public Transport Authority at the moment. That's sort of 7 bores, 60 kilometres worth of pipe, pumping infrastructure. We help with the licensing consulting side of that as well. And about 15,000 irrigation heads that I love so much. So that's as fun as it gets. Water Manager is our trading platform as well that we developed in-house. It's where you can list what groundwater allocations you have for sale with your property. And then as a buyer, you can go in there and type your property address, and it'll filter by the resources that are applicable to your property, which makes it really unique. So you can only really make offers on groundwater resources that are for sale that you will actually be able to get on your property, which is cool. You can make offers through that platform as well, negotiate a deal, what volume, and then make it contractual all through that platform, which is really neat. And that's sort of our aggregator for water licensing, and we built that a few years back, and that's sort of us trying to get that all working in WA.
Is that free and readily accessible to everybody, or does they need to go through you to get access to it?
Free, fully free. Yeah, anyone can register an account. You get a nice little email from us when you do, but there's no cost, and there's no cost to list. Though we are a service over the top of that, so once it comes to providing an application to trade and bringing the actual deal together contractually, then that's where our service steps in. There's a cost for that, but as far as listing and making offers go, there's no cost for that. Though we do make a commercial agreement with an offer, and you have to agree to that if you're doing that, so you are making that agreement via the web app. There's not much around that, but yeah, no cost. Cool. So today we're going to go speak to how water trading functions. Basically, the intent is that we're able to trade a license from one property to another. There's a lot of hydrogeology that goes into the buying and the selling side of that to make sure the property can actually support that, as well as the regulation and the sustainability of these trades is how this sort of moves. And our job in the middle of all that is to bring those three things together. We advise on regulation, strategy, as well as we provide the listings and ultimately negotiate the deals to make a trade possible commercially. And then we consult and provide hydrogeological services as well, just to basically facilitate those trades. Okay, water regulation. It's a fun topic. I like it. Basically, I feel like WA is just behind a little bit. We're just getting started from a regulatory point of view here. The main objective of the regulator, being Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, is the environment, and that should be the way it is. Though they're almost purely environmentally driven, it feels at times, whereas there is a commercial reality to trading that isn't really recognised by the regulator. They regulate the environment, not the commercial nature of it. So this is largely an unregulated industry that we're filling in. The issue with that is that, yes, and we obviously don't dispute that we need to regulate the environmental side of it, so our groundwater is kept in fair use and that we don't impact it negatively. There is still the commercial aspect to trading water that doesn't really get looked at. And we're talking, these are multi-million-dollar transactions, okay, some of these. They're huge value. There's a lot of money on the line for people here. This is life-changing for some people and some projects as to whether this is going to be a success or not. And DWO don't really fully recognize that. And what the biggest example of that is when a trade is at its final stages of being processed. There's no check to make sure that the seller got their money. And that's a pretty clear one. So if once the transaction is done, as far as the trade's been approved, the buyer will have their water license as per the trade, but the seller may not have their money yet, and there's no way of reversing that. There's no checkpoint. It's not like in property where you settle in 30 days, you get your money, they get the house and the title deed. It's not like that at all. They'll just bang the trade through, and then it's up to the seller to go and sue the buyer potentially for that money. That's a service we offer where we hold the funds up front, but it'd be nice to be working with the regulator a bit more from the commercial aspect to make this, to help facilitate some of these trades. But the point there is trading is difficult because it's an environmental regulator, not really recognizing the commercial nature of a lot of these deals. And you have a lot of individuals dealing with multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies, right? So there is room there for people to get taken advantage of potentially, and we believe that this sort of thing should be regulated a bit better. And it's left up to us as a private entity to manage a lot of the shortcomings of what could be covered by regulation, or at least better understood enough so that we could put safeguards in place so people are protected. Regulation is always changing. Some recent examples here are the Gnangara groundwater allocation plan, where licenses getting reduced off the ground, off the Gnangara mound by 10% by 2028. So that's a necessary thing. I think water cover is by 30% as well, if I remember that right. So that's a good thing. We need to reduce usage through what is a heavily over-allocated resource in the Gnangara mound. But the delivery of that is largely, this is what's happening and you have to deal with that, rather than starting to think about how could we make this easier and what could we change, what services could we offer as a regulator to enable these people that are going through a significant change if they're already fully utilising their groundwater. How could we facilitate things being made a bit easier? And there hasn't really been a lot around that. There's been comms around the change, but not what we're going to do to help. And trades could help that, right? If they're losing 10%, then this is a matter of just enabling trading to recoup that 10% on their property potentially. But there's no real aid there that we would like to see. The Gingin groundwater allocation plan is another piece of policy where there were some changes made. I'll go through in a bit more detail. That got applied retroactively to existing trades, which was kind of difficult, where we had a pre-existing trade and commercial agreement, and then the allocation plan was implemented around July last year, and then that was retroactively applied to trades that were made under the previous allocation plan, and then blew them up effectively, and there was no consideration for that, even with heavy dispute and us nearly going to SAT about it, SAT being the state tribunal. Okay, we're licensing and trading. So I know a lot of you guys would probably know how licensing is managed in Western Australia, but I'll explain it briefly anyway. I'm sure you guys know what an aquifer is. If we imagine that as a layer of water, a body of water, pretty loose description of aquifer, that's segregated from another, that would be a confined or semi-confined aquifer. That's the water body itself, but then that gets divided into an area. To make management of that aquifer simpler and a bit more, I don't know, continuous, I suppose, and realistic for the area if you're managing a large body. That's divided into areas. These are the areas for WA. Perth obviously getting a bit more detail, just given the resources that are there and how well they're understood. But an area covers typically quite a large area. The Gingin one, for example, where are we here? Gingin here. Gingin is where I grew up. Actually, it's a small town site here, really, but the Gingin area itself goes all the way to the coast and quite far north. Perth is another example that includes Perth, but also surrounding suburbs. So there's a general area given to a resource. Now, to make a resource, you have a combination of an aquifer and a sub-area. Now, a sub-area is an area within the main area. This is Gingin. All of these little boundaries are sub-areas. Okay, they're not necessarily suburbs. They typically overlap with multiple ones. They follow borders sometimes, not always. And these sub-areas, this is for superficial on the east here and superficial on the west, through the Gingin area, they change once you get into a different aquifer as well. So if you go deeper down into the Leadable Parmelia aquifer here, that's one big sub-area all the way from U-Shade and Mora, compared to superficial, which is 4 or 5 different sub-areas. And then Leadable on the west side here is 3, when you've got a lot more here, even though it's the same area. It's divided up differently depending on what resource we're dealing with here. Now, to trade, not only do you have to be in the same aquifer, if we stick with the Leadable over here, you have to be, or the superficial here, you'll have to be, if you want to trade with someone, you need to be in the superficial, obviously, and talking about that. You need to be in the same area, this being Gingin, but you also need to be in the same sub-area, right? So if you're talking about seabird here, if you want to trade in superficial seabird, you can only trade in superficial seabird. And there is no negotiating that, right? This boundary, if this is your neighbour right on the South Morgan Park area, you're you're not trading with them. There's no hope. It's an almost immediate rejection. And that's so that this can be managed individually, I suppose. We want to make sure that the amount of water that's hitting that aquifer and replenishing each year is managed such that we're not taking any more than that out each year. So each one of these are individually managed. The trouble with that is when it comes to trading is that if there's a high demand in a very specific sub-area, that can't be relieved by other sub-areas. And there may be a lower demand here, or there could be a limited number of license holders here. There may be one really large one or two really large ones, and other areas there may be multiple ones. If this is fully allocated, then there's not really, you end up with a lot of different sub-markets. So in Western Australia alone, we're talking, I think, 350 different combinations of aquifers and sub-areas, and all of them are priced individually, and all with different challenges. They might have 100 license holders in one sub-area, so there's plenty of room to trade, and like I said, might only be a couple. Or there might be really reluctant sellers, or there might be really uneducated or non-sophisticated individuals with water trading and things like that, and so it's a bit more of a challenge to trade with it. But every one of these areas is its own sub-market and has individual pricing depending on the nature of that sub-area and that resource that you're trying to trade. And then, to make things a bit harder, this is Koala, that area here, that sub-area there, in the Leadable Parmelia aquifer, all the way to the east of this map here. Under the Gingin groundwater allocation plan, even though this is not physically mapped anywhere outside of this plan, they divide this sub-area into zones, zone 1, 2, and 3. The nature and the goal of this zone application was to get the dense water use of the Mushade and spread it a bit further north towards Mora. And this zone meant that there was trading rules around the zones. So you could trade you trade north basically, so 3 to 2 towards the 1, and 3 within itself, 2 in itself and into 1, and then 1 within itself, to try and push allocations north over time to reduce the load down near Gingin and Mushade. And then last year they changed it so you couldn't trade at all in zone 3. It didn't matter what you did. Now, the impact of that is kind of dramatic. The issue is we had 2 trades, I think, at that time going on when that happened. One may have stuck through, or neither of them did. I know one of them, in the middle of, they just outright said with that change they're going to reject it based on the updated groundwater management plan that was just released and made active. And we were 6 or so months into that deal. Contractually, it was all locked down. We were holding about $300,000 in cash for the buyer to make that happen. And on the very tail end, they were planning around that trade going through, and there was no interest in reviewing that decision. And the issue with that now, this is kind of a dramatic change, and this is sort of where we need more conversation, is where there was a lot of activity before and a lot of productivity towards farming and things like that, and abattoirs and other developments through the Chittering area down here in zone 3, where leadable is practically your only water option of any scale, there is no movement whatsoever. There is about 30, or maybe less, 20 odd license holders for leadable Parmelia in zone 3, maybe a little bit more, and they're currently the only properties that will ever be licensed for that resource in that area, and there's no changing that under the current allocation plan, or willingness to negotiate that with DWORK. So, very challenging. There's a groundwater management plan for practically every area, and they all have their own unique things, and this is all part of understanding trading, and where we like to think we have some value is understanding these rules and regulations to enable trading. But this should speak to how complex the trading requirements are in Western Australia as one of the most heavily regulated groundwater regions in the whole world. Cool. So there's a balance to be had here between trading and obviously the environment and compliance. Groundwater licenses aren't easy to maintain or obtain, and with most resources fully allocated or over-allocated, your only real option is to trade. You're not going to get a new license issued around Perth, basically. Trades require a compliant buyer and a compliant seller. And one of the biggest challenges we're running into is most people who are buying, they will need the water, so that's a pretty easy justification. They've got an interest, they're going to put money towards it, they probably have a purpose for it. Most people aren't speculating. But most people who are selling aren't using the water anymore, which means they're non-compliant with their water use because they haven't been utilising it, which makes them uneligible to trade. So that reduces the issue around trade. That makes it such a challenge to trade water, because typically if they haven't used it in the last 3 years, then it's actually no longer a viable license at all, and it's certainly not available to be traded. So us pairing up buy and sell becomes very difficult. A big part of what we do is just compliance assessment to see if a trade we believe is going to be successful or not.
Does that only apply in really big groundwater areas? I don't think everybody's got a 4 metre. So in the case of Melbourne, isn't a metre.
Yep, so the challenge with that is if you're under 10,000 kilolitres, and then you're typically not going to have a metering requirement, but that's not a lot of water. If you want to trade anything of scale into the hundreds of thousands of kilolitres, then you're trying to deal with people who already have those scales. The other issue is, even if you don't have a meter, they'll still look at drone imagery to see if they think you're utilising it or not. And we get drone imagery and satellite imagery thrown at us all the time, where the owner has said that they are using it, but they probably haven't been.
So does that present a risk to the seller then if they get caught out for having not used it, where it reduces their licence?
Absolutely, which makes them even more reluctant,
Yeah.
because we're upfront about that, because we don't want someone to be really impacted negatively. I mean, if these people have sat on these licenses for 10 years and haven't utilised them and are trying to sell them for a profit, I think there is some issue around that. I think it should be negotiated in some capacity. But yeah, they are exposing themselves, and we flag that they may have it taken off them as part of this process, because they're obviously getting fully reviewed to get them through.
But isn't that also a failure of regulation? Because I know over East, you have to reapply for your licenses every 5 or so years.
Yep.
So you don't have an unending license like we do here.
It's a 10-year program here. 10 years, yeah. It can be as low as 5. Typically, it would be a decade, and it's a similar thing. You have to reapply for it. But under a current regulation, if you don't use it, you're assessed on a water year program. They look at the last 3 water years. Your water year doesn't necessarily run from January to January or July to July. It can be some arbitrary month. They look at your last 3 water years. If you haven't utilised, or whatever amount you have utilised up to in those 3 water years, that is your tradable volume typically, and your unexposed volume of water, and that probably won't be reclaimed. But yeah, 10 years is renewal in Perth. Cool. The water trading process, top half is us. So someone lists on Water Manager, a buyer within the same groundwater resource looks at it, makes an offer on volume and price and conditions. We do our compliance review on both the buyer and the seller. At this point, we've locked in contracts, and we've collected the funds up front in full from the buyer. And we hold that in a separate entity, and that's to secure the funds for the seller. And that includes stamp duty and all fees that we have to pay to the regulator and our own. We lodge a trade to DWER, and it's not just a form. We'll do a full cover letter. We'll explain any compliance issues and our justification. If it's a large trade, we may even have being forthcoming with a H1 or a H2 report, just to really make sure that we're going through with it. Within 1 to 2 months, it'll go from the desk of the pre-review onto an officer's desk, and then anywhere from 4 to 8 months from there, we'll make our way through an assessment. All the issues that may come up with that property or properties get addressed, hopefully, and then we make our way to a stamp duty request. We, on behalf of the buyer, lodge the stamp duty payment to the Office of State Revenue of WA, and then within 4 to 6 weeks, DWER will typically issue the license. That process there is 6 to 18 months from start to finish, with most of it sitting with the regulator.
Do you do the H1 and H2 as part of your service, or?
It's all through us. We contract. We don't have hydros working directly for us, but that's one of the small scopes that we'll do as part of the service offering. Yeah, but we'll outsource that. We have a couple of hydros that we work with for that sort of work, and we understand we put our own little bit of spin on it and make it look pretty and all those sorts of things, and then we'll use those for a few different things. But that's one of the main the pure purest of the hydro work we do is H1 and H2s. We also do our own production testing as part of the H2 as well, so a lot of the groundwork is done by us. Okay. And then hopefully you're at an approval. Just for your interest, this is some pricing from a few different resources from around Perth. Up the top there, you've got Perth Swan confined leadable. That sub-area rate is from Midland up to Bullsbrook. And our latest trade this year with a land developer and a happy individual was $13.50 a kilolitre. So that was for, if you work out little fees, 10,000 kilolitres nowadays in this resource will cost you 150 grand to transact that. That's the most, you're looking at the most expensive groundwater in Western Australia, and I'd say quite confidently in Australia, and maybe around the world. I think it'd be up there as far as allocations go. That's a lot of money. Just for a bulky of water every year, it's $13.50. But that is the market rate. We don't set that. It's just what people are willing to pay. There's not a lot of supply, and there's some very thirsty land developers going through Bullsbrook at the moment. That was the rate set. Superficial and Mirrabooka in that same sort of area is about a third of that. Perth South confined is a similar up and comer, which is sort of Midland and down south and beyond down Armidale. In Leadville as well, you're looking at around $10 was the latest traded value, and that's going to go up. I reckon that could overtake Swan confined there. I reckon it's going to be heading towards $15 a kilolitre pretty soon as more land development's going through there, and supply is very restricted and very reluctant for some reason. I don't know. But $10 recent trade last year, I'd see that going up. I'd love to own a few properties with this resource attached to it, so it's going to appreciate much greater rate than the property itself will. And then a few different other examples through there you can see. A lot of the stuff around Perth is at least a few dollars a kilolitre. The further away you get from Perth, the pricing goes down a bit, the volumes increase, and there's a little bit more movability sometimes. But anywhere in the heart of Perth, particularly in the Swan Valley, very, very expensive.
How much does steam water cost?
So steam water per kilolitre is when you're just utilising around for your house, and a typical domestic rate is around $3 a kilolitre. But you're, I believe, roughly around $3. But you're paying for that every year. So this allocation you're paying off once off, but we typically depreciate it over, if you're going to depreciate it or look at an asset payoff period of over a decade. So you're really paying $1.35 here, which is less than half the domestic rate for steam water, and that is the lowest tier as your domestic rate. If you're going to use commercial scale steam water, you go up through a tier level. It gets more expensive the more you use, not less. So this is, even at some of the most expensive prices, the business case for this is still really strong compared to steam. And if you've ever dealt with water cold when it comes to accessing commercial scale water, it gets very expensive really fast.
So most of your buyers developers, or is there other industries as well that are?
Big mix. Developers are a lot of what's going on at the moment, just because of the big push to ease the housing affordability crisis, and a lot of stuff is getting rushed through regulation to get approvals on the ground. So a lot of land developers, a lot of agriculture, horse properties are another thing as well. People setting those up.
I mean, I have a horse property and I could not. No. You can afford that for water.
One of our clients has 200,000 kilolitres of Swan confined and leadable, and that is worth a hell of a lot more than the property that they have themselves.
No, absolutely. So, but if you're trying to buy it, you have to have a pretty impressive horse business to justify that.
I don't think any horse business is justifying it, but I think the lifestyle might, maybe. I don't know, people are surprised sometimes and others not really. I think it's kind of cool because you can look at it as a bit of an asset to that property and how the trend over the last 5 years has been upwards. It's actually a lot of growth there. People look at it as a bit of an investment. But if you're setting up fresh, yeah, like it's sort of tough to justify as a hobbyist. But we have clients that are making soft drinks and all kinds of things, looking at business cases to get off names. Yeah, it's a wide range. Anyone that needs a commercial scale water will need a license, and we're dealing with.
Do you have mining customers needing processing water or anything like that?
Mining is generally in remote areas, typically. We do have resource clients that are close to Perth, within a sort of 3-4 hour range of us.
Boddington or something?
Sorry?
Like Boddington?
Yeah, not with Boddington. Boddington established a lot of their groundwater requirements quite early on, and they don't need to trade. So we don't have looked at Boddington before. And a lot of big mining companies have their own in-house hydrogeology and things like that, so they're handling a lot of this stuff themselves. Where we get involved with resource entity at all is typically if they're setting a new area up and they're close to Perth and they need to trade, that's where they're sort of forced to deal with us a bit. And then we try and sink our way in there on the drilling scopes and things like that while we're at it. But yeah, we've got clients like Hanson doing the concrete side of things and all that, Strike Energy, which are doing the oil and gas stuff up north there a bit, but not tier 1 mining. I don't really have an interest in going back there in a hurry. And typically trading out that way isn't really a thing. They're not over allocated resources. They're largely not understood at all. They do their own studies and then justify to the regulator their use, rather than us. A lot of our projects centre around the trade to begin with. Cool. So our goal with water management is to make things more transparent and ultimately, ideally, make the process of trading a lot easier within WA. Ideally, that means more trades and people are getting water what they need. Obviously, for our business, we'd love to see that so that we can grow and do more with that. But right now, it's quite difficult. But this is our first major step with trading. We're trying to get and aggregate as much water licensing listings onto this platform as we can, get the two-sided marketplace up and going properly so we can see more trades going through and hopefully use a bit of pressure there to get to the regulator to improve things from a trading perspective. And also more data, better data will mean fairer pricing and more well understood sub-markets. That is already pretty complex as I've explained. So yeah, we're trying to push our water manager product through to help with that. This is a quick example of it in place here. You can create a free account. You type, this is from a buyer's perspective, they type property address in. It'll only show you listings that are applicable to that address. You can make an offer on how many kiloliters and what the requested price is per kiloliter. This is part of the Form 4T for trading, which is a little bit of information about the buyer here. The seller's already inputted this when they listed. And then you confirm you're making a formal offer and you accept the terms and you hit submit. And then on the seller's side, they'll receive this offer and then they'll be able to review it, make a counter offer, or see that there, make a counter offer or accept it or decline it. Once it's an accepted offer, we'll see that and then be able to action it on our end. Cool, so to tie all that together, from a hydro perspective, we do pre-trade, we do a lot of assessments around whether a property is going to be able to sustain that volume of water out of the selected resource or not, and whether we think it's going to flag for some form of review as far as impacting surrounding properties or not with the regulator, and that's where we may preemptively produce a H2 of some form to assess that. Looking at quality, obviously a big thing. We work with concrete batching plants where there's salt requirements and chloride requirements and things like that. So we'll want to be advising that up front, whether this trade is applicable to them. This is a pretty permanent thing. So once you've done a trade, there's no take backs. You have to deal with it. So that's where sort of the hydro side of us comes in. And on the other side, we're doing sort of looking at H2 assessments as well, particularly as things change, but also water conservation plans with properties and stuff like that can sometimes be a prerequisite as part of the trade going through, as well as some other operational requirements that we may draft to enable that water license to stay compliant. This is a quick little case study for us. This is the Midland Brick site actually. That is getting developed into domestic housing. We work for the developer there. It's a beautiful development right on the river, and they've already done a portion of it. This is a really unique site. Actually, this is sort of where we got to flare a lot of our own skills here, which is cool. They needed roughly 50 to 60,000 kilolitres for this development, largely for public open space, which included the Jack Williamson Oval, which is just here, which is dead currently. Part of their deal with the city of Swan was they're going to bring that oval back to life for this development to be approved, and they needed water for that. You look at superficial first, the construction costs are less, and the licensing costs are typically less. We got a check on a seller for superficial, which was good, but they built a brick plant on clay, as you would. So it doesn't transmit water very well. So superficial through Midland generally, certainly on top of a clay pit, is basically impossible. We didn't expect the superficial to be productive in any capacity through here. So even though we could get the license, we didn't think we were going to get the full 50, 60,000 kilolitres a year out of the ground, even with sort of 10, 20, 30 bores potentially. So we looked at leadable. Leadable is going to be expected to be productive over 100 metres deep, and we should get the water we need. But trading in South Perth, Perth South confined is exceptionally difficult, as we learned a few years back. There was no one willing to trade in small amounts, let alone 50 or 60K we needed. So that actually ruled leadable out. Yarrabee was always also ruled out. That's not a tradable resource here. So we were back to superficial, where we had this licensing deal. And as we learned, this is one of the first big jobs we did, where the licensing side of it and the tradability of the resource ultimately dictated our resource selection, which was superficial. So we had to get a little creative here. So we did a seismic survey of Midland Brick while it was operating, which was really cool. If you're not familiar with seismic surveying, it's where you inject energy into the ground, typically with a hammer, big hammer, and then you have a string or a line of sensors that will measure the velocity of vibrations through the ground from you injecting that energy, which is really cool. And what you can produce is a map like this. This is one of the lines, and we did 4 across Midland Brick. This is a bit of a study, but this is one of the lines we did here. This is the edge of Midland Brick and the start of the second stage of the development. And basically, the darker areas are higher velocity, and higher velocity is what we'd expect from denser material, like clay. And lower velocity materials is what we'd expect from consolidated sands or coarser material that we'd hope would be able to transmit water. And what we were theorizing is that it was probably, hopefully, some channels of superficial material that could actually transmit water through this clay pit. And this is what we got back as a result. This is sort of 10 meters deep here. We expected a section of sandy material on top, loamy material, and then a lot of clays, which is what we thought this was through here. And here's our channel. And on the second line, which was up here, we saw a similar channel, and the second one as well. And on the third line, the same channel appeared, right? So we drilled this spot here in a car park, and then further up here on the second line, in this location exactly to the meter, to centimeter actually. And we went down 40 meters before we hit the confining layer of the leadable, and we produced 8 liters a second out of an area that we were expecting to get nothing out of. And 8 liters a second on its own justified the full production requirements for the development. We got another 5 liters a second up there, and we're doing it. We just did another line where we found the same channel further down here across the oval here, and we're expecting to get a similar result through that. So that was a really cool one. The licensing dictated us. We had to force some creativity out with the seismic survey, and then that's the results there, which we're pretty proud of. We did a report around that. We drilled the bores. We did all our sampling and consolidation of that, and the lithological reporting. We did all the production testing on this job as well, the quality testing, and then ultimately this got developed, and this board here is doing all the public open space irrigation through here currently.
How do you take short-term test pumping data for a 10-year license and justify sustainability of the resource?
Yeah, I mean, it was multiple bores were tested, and then we extrapolate that out over a multi-decade expectation of its performance over time. We review the whole. If we don't think it's really convincing or it's on the line, then we'll do an extrapolation of what we expected the whole resource to perform like over years.
Just looking at your site or moving beyond the bounds to where that drainage feature was recharged from? And
Yeah,
what else
we'll
is
go as
happening?
far as that. On that property, looking at the surface area that we think is going to be the recharge point for it. It can be pretty high level or it can get really low level. Typically we follow what's required of us from DEWA.
Is there losing gaining stream interaction with the creek was that a river next to it or was it?
We will assess that. It is a river, it is a creek there, it's a non-flowing creek though. But there's a wetland there that's protected, I think, on the top of my head. That will be part of an environmental consideration. We typically don't do anything environmental related, but our client here has an environmental consultant that's telling us what we've got to do there as part of that. We won't typically go into recharge considerations in great detail unless we're required to. In our experience, it'll just largely be dictated by the DEWA operate off a standard, some Australian standard for what pump test data would be acceptable and over what period of time, and we stick to that.
So effectively you're buying an allocation, but then you have to, do they put safeguards in the operating strategy for triggers? You can't draw down more than X and turn off the pumps regardless of your allocation?
So there is groundwater monitoring requirements put on larger scale stuff. Typically, it's got to be at least 100,000 kilolitres in allocation to be where there's a monitoring requirement put on it. And there's an operating strategy that's put on that that's part of a larger operating strategy that they will have to stick to and report back to the regulator on. There is no hard limits they put on us there, but what I would expect if groundwater levels got to a certain level that they were concerned, they would advise us there. So we don't self-do that, but we'll have a monitoring program potentially as part of an operating strategy that the regulator buys into. So they have visibility on behalf of us, just to make sure nothing's getting out of control. But I haven't seen a hard limit on water levels ever put on us as part of a license or anything like that, or part of an operating strategy, just reporting requirements. And the granularity of that requirement varies a lot. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Finish up, I asked at the start why is water training so hard. I hope I answered that for you a bit here. Moving forward, really we'd like to see it be made easier. And we are doing that through hydrogeology programs with our clients to produce better data, to make better decisions around. The sustainability of this, we're trying to build a business here, but we're environmentalists at heart. We want this to be sustainable, and we want we want to enable the regulator to manage that. But ultimately, we all need to work together here, us as licensing operators, hydrogeologists, as well as regulators. There's more to be done here to make trading a lot more feasible within Western Australia, because this is quickly becoming the only viable option in a lot of areas. Thanks. Appreciate your time. Any questions?
So, Damien, go, you've got another burning question.
The re-reactive 1914, if they rewrite it, is it going to blow you out of the water?
They were going to rewrite it when they threw it in, didn't they?
That would be a tough one to rewrite. Probably need to. How do you think it might blow us out of the water?
Oh, just if they build trading into it in a different, move the goalposts on you.
They move the goalposts on us every 6 months. That's sort of part of the job for us to adjust to that. I think we'd be a front runner with anything that's going on, since we're the only really ones taking a keen interest like we are. I'd love to see it change. I'd love to see us adapt the way that we have so far. We're a pretty fast moving team. I think it all needs a big shake up. It's not, the infrastructure we're really built on here is archaic and it wasn't made for trading, but they need to introduce it.
So what lessons do you think you can learn from water trading on the East Coast, which has been running for 10 or 15 years now?
Yeah.
What mistakes they've made that you can possibly work towards not making here?
Yeah, I think we're already doing a great job of not making the same mistakes there. Like they got in a few different spots, got examples of over allocating areas and ultimately draining it dry in some slots, and we're trying to prevent that here already with our current regulation. I think the learning we could have of it is we need to look at it like a a market with all different stocks on there almost, and we need to treat it with the understanding that these things need to move about with different needs of different individuals and different entities, and then adapt our regulation to be able to incorporate that. Because yeah, there is a lot of mistakes over there, but they have a very, very free market. It's really easy to buy allocation. So there's multiple listing services over there, and you can just grab it and it's yours, sort of thing. Whereas we're waiting 6 to 18 months at a time to get trades through, which is insane.
Okay, do you have any comments?
Very
Put you on the spot.
very good thought, yeah.
Thanks, mate.
Do you guys work together?
No, well, we better
Oh, no, I mean, not, yeah. Obviously on different
We
sides of
might.
the fence, but yeah.
try and lock down any hydro dealer. They're hard to get hold of. I'm going to kidnap JP, I reckon.
No pizza. Oh, sorry. Irresponsible service of alcohol.
Thanks so much for your time. I'm here with Maria as well. She actually built the licensing side of our business, and she's one of my co-founders in the business. We built that together. It was a little project that came to her to get going. I'm up here talking about. She's a real licensing expert in our business, which is cool. But we're happy to answer any questions. If you guys have any queries around trading or water strategy in general, we're a part of IAH, so I'm happy to field any calls or anything like that. But thank you so much for your time. It's a real pleasure to come up here and speak.
Thanks for speaking.
Thank you.
Thank you for lending us your laptop.
Appreciate it.
I